Not sure whether I'm meant to just kick it off. Yes, Marty is nodding at me, so yes, I will. Thanks for coming. I will just begin by acknowledging the Wadawurrung and Djadjawurrung people. For those of you who don't know very much about AERO, we are a completely virtual organisation. We were set up in the midst of lockdown. So the people who work for AERO work all over the country. And our acknowledgement of country is an opportunity to learn a little bit about each other, but also the traditional owners all over this big country that we have. And we take a lot of pleasure in acknowledging the traditional custodians of all of the places that we come from, and have a beautiful piece of artwork that we use to celebrate that every time. Can I say, I really love Greg Ashman and his ideas and his feeble attempts at jokes, but I do not love that he stole my thunder. The oldest written texts that survive today are disappointingly mundane. This is, as Greg has already told you, a clay tablet from southern Iraq from 5,200 years ago. There you go, I can fill in the date that he couldn't quite grasp. I might put that on the ground. While we might wish that it gave us insight into the profound thoughts and works of ancient poets, philosophers and scientists, in fact, it does seem to have been written by someone more akin to an accountant. It says, here's the translation, 29,086 measures of barley, 37 months, signed Kushim, and it's known as the Kushim tablet. Most of the oldest tablets we have contain this type of information, and it's now generally accepted that writing emerged in Mesopotamia in order to record commercial transactions. IOU, 3 years' worth of barley was the prosaic beginning of one of the most important inventions in human history. Fortunately, the poets and the philosophers and the scientists didn't take too long to catch on. And just as the ancient accountants found that writing was very useful for recording more information than they could hold in their memories, other thinkers throughout the ages have found that by writing the ideas down, we can overcome some of the limits imposed on us by our quickly overloaded working memories. By committing our thinking to writing, we can work with more information simultaneously than we can with the spoken word alone. And we can also work with much more complex concepts. We can describe and explain, instruct, persuade, narrate. We can assess, revise, and extend detailed thoughts. We can text, we can tweet, we can entertain. Writing is a ubiquitous mode of communication, and the rapid increase of technological changes over the last 30 years has actually increased the amount of writing that we engage with on a day-to-day basis. There is evidence from history that the development of writing enabled a leap in the sophistication of societies where it occurred. I'm not sure if that's going to hold true for Twitter, but we can see. Now, let me give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I started my career as an English and history teacher, so you have to indulge the little foray into ancient clay tablets about writing. It's a perfect combination of things for me to want to talk about. But actually what I want to talk to you about today is where we're up to right now in Australia with writing and writing instruction in schools. I'm going to run through what we know about how writing skills develop, as well as how we're going as a nation in teaching them. And I'll give you a sneak peek at some resources that AERO will soon make available to help schools strengthen their teaching of writing. So for any of you who haven't heard of AERO, can I suggest first of all that you don't start by asking the AARE what we are or what we do, because they seem to get an awful lot wrong. We are the National Education Evidence Agency. We were established by the 9 education ministers who asked us to do the work of undertaking research, we generate research. Translating and presenting research, we acknowledge there's a lot of stuff already out there, but it's quite dense and difficult to get to, especially if you're a busy classroom teacher or school leader. And we also do the work of encouraging the adoption of evidence into practice. So we are designed to be more than a research organisation in that we go further than the research. Our work is about building a bridge from the research into practice. It's terrific to do great research, got a gorgeous looking website, heaps of wonderful stuff on it, but if nobody reads it, if nobody puts it into practice in a classroom setting, then we don't get any closer to achieving our vision, which is improving the learning of students. So given that we aim to bridge that gap between research and practice, our work is not going to be only successful if it takes place in the proverbial ivory tower, which is, dare I suggest, where AERO people mostly reside. We work with both the researchers and with the practitioners in schools. And in that vein, right from the outset, I'm going to acknowledge 3 people who I believe are at this conference today, who've been instrumental in AERO's work on writing, all of whom are at or connected to Queenwood, which has been one of our partner schools for the project I'm going to describe. Dylan Chorwell, Head of English, who I met earlier this morning. Hi, Dylan. Rebecca Birch, Academic in Residence. I haven't spotted today, but I did see her at a conference last week, so we bump into each other frequently. And Kylie Holmes, who was our Partner Literacy Leader at the school. I am going to say more about the partnership with Queenwood later in my remarks, but I want to give a plug to Dylan's session straight after lunch today in the McClure Theatre. While my speech is about the research on writing and the work that AERO's done to support schools with writing instruction, Dylan's going to tell the story of tackling writing as an area for improvement from the perspective of the school. So the 2 speeches will kind of complement one another. If you find something useful in this one, I'd strongly encourage you to sit in on Dylan's. If you don't find anything useful in this one, go to listen to Dylan anyway, because it's not his fault. Now, writing is important. You've chosen to join this session, so I'm hoping you're probably already convinced that writing is a topic worthy of greater attention than it has received of late. And if that's the case, indulge me, because I want to try and convince any of the fence sitters among us. Writing is an especially important skill for 3 reasons. The first one is that writing about what we learn helps us to understand and to remember. Note-taking, preparing summaries, generating or responding to questions, and engaging in extended writing tasks causes our brains to engage more deeply in the content that's being heard or read. It helps us to make connections between the information being presented and schemas that we already hold in our long-term memories. So this boosts both the encoding and the retention of the content. It helps with what Greg was describing this morning about building that knowledge that's in your long-term memory. It helps to build it and embed it and make sure that it's there for the automatic recall that he was describing as being so helpful to the new learning that we're trying to do in schools. The second thing is that writing, of course, helps us to communicate our ideas. It means that you need to be careful where you leave your IOUs, because they might be read out at a conference 5,200 years from now. We write down the stuff that we want to be able to think about, talk about, communicate about. Most of the time that writing is not a solitary activity, but it is an outward-facing activity in which the writer's attempting to share their thoughts with an audience. In practical terms, for students, writing's essential to demonstrate what they've learned in school and what they know for the work that they'll do in the future. It's largely, after all, through written assessment that we judge students' learning of curriculum. That curriculum we've been teaching them over 13 years, by and large what we do is ask them to sit a set of exams at the end of it where they write down what they've learned. They write down the complexity of the thinking they can do about it, the remembering they have of the important information that they've gained. Finally, writing allows us to improve our thinking. We can do a first draft of our ideas. We can assess and revise them. We can add precision and complexity. We can write down something and we can go away and research it and come back and improve it and refine it. The limitations of working memory mean that we can only engage with ideas expressed verbally in this way up to a certain degree of complexity. Writing allows us to extend our thinking further than we otherwise could. So, it's important, but it's not being learned well by our students at the moment and hasn't been over some years now. Given its importance, the trend in assessment data on student writing is concerning. Mean writing scores in persuasive writing in NAPLAN have declined since 2011. The trend is more pronounced in years 7 and 9. So what you can see in those two graphs is the mean writing scores and the percentages of students in the bottom two bands. And I'll just note the research that I'm going to show you a couple of graphs from was a decade of NAPLAN writing assessment data, but it was to a point prior to the reset of the NAPLAN scale, so it does describe at or below minimum standard, and I know we're not using that language for that level of achievement any longer. The problem that we see in writing is at both the highest and lowest levels of achievement. From 2011 to 2018, the share of students performing at or below the national minimum standard increased by 6 percentage points for Year 5 and by 8 percentage points for Year 9. And those of you who know NAPLAN well will know that at or below the national minimum standard is a very, very low standard. The problem is particularly acute in secondary schools. By almost any measure we use, there is a marked decline in writing performance as students move through the junior secondary years. Not only do their mean scores decline, but the gap between low and high achieving students widens across learning stages. And when you think about Year 9 is not far away from that Year 12 point where we're going to be using writing as our means to assess what they know, it's problematic that in Year 9 we're seeing the worst outcomes, the biggest declines, the biggest gaps. So to understand what's behind this decline in writing and how we can address it, I think we first need to understand a bit about what the writing is and how it's assessed. Now, these things get animated. Oh, it is coming in automatically. Excellent. So in 2022, AERO published a literature review that looked at the existing evidence about how students learn and develop their writing skills, as well as the teaching practices that support this process. Our work built on earlier reports by the Australian Catholic University, which they had done for the New South Wales Education Standards Authority. And those reports are quite interesting to look at as well, because ACU surveyed teachers to find out about their confidence as teachers of writing. Did they know enough themselves to confidently teach writing? Did they take an explicit and systematic approach to the teaching of writing? And the answers were pretty dismal. Teachers felt completely unprepared to teach writing in their subject area. They didn't have any confidence that they were doing it particularly well or successfully, and they didn't know where to go for help. Writing is not a single ability. It's a complex skill involving the execution and coordination of a set of component skills and processes and knowledge. So given the different components, should any of these not yet be automated and require too much attention from the student, cognitive overload occurs, as Greg was describing this morning, and that impacts the writing. The more we can explicitly teach the skills and processes of writing and allow students to develop automaticity with them, the more cognitive space is available to students to focus on the knowledge that they're writing about. And this doesn't just apply to things like being able to handwrite or touch type. It goes to automaticity about the structures of English language, the grammar that they use, understanding automatically correct syntax, not needing to stretch for the spelling of a word, not limiting the choice of vocabulary because of lack of confidence about the spelling of a word. There are lots of ways that writing and the skills of writing can be automated so that working memory is freed up for the important work of developing the knowledge and the thinking. So to run through just some of the key component skills, firstly, there is handwriting and typing as well as spelling. Effortless handwriting, typing and spelling lay the foundations for writing, and persistent difficulties with them affect writing quality. Secondly, time and attention needs to be dedicated to developing students' skills with parts of speech or word-level grammar, how to represent a range of of sentence types using appropriate punctuation, for example. And thirdly, students need to be taught how to create increasingly complex sentences through the addition of detail and the use of coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. And I'll explain more about why that's important, but complex sentences enable complex thought to be demonstrated. It's really difficult. Hey. Which one? Complex sentences enable complex thought to be demonstrated. Oh, yeah. Yep. It was that students need to be taught how to create increasingly complex sentences through addition of detail and use of subordinating and coordinating conjunctions. That matters because complexity. An example of the processes involved in writing is the cycle of planning, drafting, evaluating and revising text, explicitly teaching students the distinct strategies for pre-writing and writing and post-writing. All of those phases of developing a text with modelling, guided practice and feedback has been shown to have a significant positive effect on student writing quality in both primary and secondary schools, and including for students with learning disabilities. As with so much of what we talk about in relation to explicit teaching practice being by far the most effective approach to ensuring good learning, it applies for all students in all contexts from all kinds of backgrounds. Finally, the role of knowledge in writing well cannot be overstated. There's no level of skill I could have in my spelling and grammar and sentence construction that would enable me to write a worthy piece on this year's race for the AFL Premiership. It isn't just the content knowledge that's important. There's also the knowledge of the different genres in which we write, which differ across academic disciplines. The knowledge that students need to write a science report is different to the knowledge they need to compose a narrative story or a book review. And the different expectations of writing in different learning areas need to be explicitly taught. And this was one of the things that was very clear from the survey of teachers, that they weren't even necessarily aware that this is true for their disciplines, that the writing is different. The writing demands in science is different to history, is different to English, and recognising that there is a different task and different information that needs to inform the teaching was not something that was on their radar. Just as an aside, a long time ago, before we had NAPLAN, imagine that, life before NAPLAN, I used to work on a writing assessment program in New South Wales, and we worked with teachers to develop writing assessment prompts, which they then trialled with their own classes. And we collected up all of this work and then analysed them in order to identify prompts that we could use for a statewide assessment of writing. And even way back then, it revealed how little teachers understood the writing demands of their own subject areas. And I can recall a science teacher whose writing prompt was, imagine you are a hamburger. Write about your journey through the digestive system. She imagined she was stimulating an information report about the digestive system. But of course, what she got were truly gruesome narratives, replete with personification and compelling imagery that would have absolutely succeeded as horror genre narratives, but utterly failed as science texts. So beyond the content knowledge and the understanding of genre, students also need knowledge of domain-specific academic vocabulary. Explicit teaching of specialised vocabulary has a huge effect on writing performance. So all of this led AERO to question which of these many component parts of writing were actually causing the greatest issues for Australian students. We can see the decline in overall writing ability, but knowing that performance on NAPLAN writing test is declining is useful for drawing attention to there might be something going wrong with this complex and important skill set that we want people to have. But that overall finding doesn't tell us much about what specifically we need to be doing about it. So we went deep into the data that AERO was able to make available to us. The NAPLAN writing assessment doesn't just give us an overall mark. A student's overall writing mark is a composite of marks against a set of 10 assessment criteria which reflect the component skills that make up a writing text. Students receive a mark for each of the criteria on the slide: their spelling, their vocabulary, their punctuation, their sentence structure, and so on. And these add together to form their overall writing mark. So AERO set about delving into this data in a much more granular way, looking at the scores against the specific writing criteria. Our aim was to try and identify which particular writing skills Australian students are having trouble with. And the analysis that we did was, at the time, probably still is, the most extensive investigation into writing data that's been conducted in Australia. Our researchers analysed more than 10 million NAPLAN writing results spanning 2011 to 2021, as well as hundreds of samples of students' NAPLAN writing. As you would know, NAPLAN alternates the type of writing task presented, or it doesn't alternate it, it kind of surprises us now with which genre is it going to be. Our analysis focused primarily on persuasive writing tasks because between you and me, the data is much more robust about the persuasive writing tasks than it is about the narrative. So the analysis of persuasive writing data shows that students in Year 9, and this is an example of Year 9 results, are finding it challenging to achieve the higher scores in advanced persuasive skills like shaping the text for their audience, where only 4% scored a 6 out of a possible 6 marks, and in generating and elaborating on ideas. So this means they are struggling to write engagingly or to offer, develop and support their arguments. These skills are of course essential to success in many Year 11 and 12 subjects, in tertiary courses, in workplaces, and they will be essential in life. If you want to be able to write a letter arguing against that traffic fine that you got, you need to be able to write a compelling and persuasive argument. But the problem starts well before these more complex skills. They matter, they need to be explicitly taught, but if you pitch the teaching immediately to that, you're going to miss out on the fact that our Year 9 students have a problem with far more basic skills in their writing than that. So take an example from, you can see sentence structure. Sentence structure is a real worry. For all the reasons I just explained, complex sentence is really important, but what we can see is not only is there a tiny proportion of Year 9 students able to score a 6 out of 6, there's a very small proportion getting 5 out of 6, so they're just not nailing the level of complexity anticipated by Year 9 writing. There's also way too many students who are featuring down in those bottom 0, 1, 2 scoring ranges. So let me go into sentence structure a little bit. This slide shows how that skill is assessed in the NAPLAN assessment. To score a 5 or a 6 out of a possible 6, students need to demonstrate a variety of correct, simple, compound and complex sentences. The percentage of Year 9 students who attained a score of 5 or 6 has declined, as we saw over time. In 2011, 21% of students scored 5 or higher. This percentage of students has declined to just 9% in 2018. The percentage of students scoring 0 to 2 has correspondingly increased. Kids can't write sentences. Who knew? There are a lot of adults who aren't too confident about it either. When this analysis was reported in the media, I had numerous journalists observe not only that their kids can't write, but nor can their colleagues who are journalists. It is something we need to attend to. So, the most effective way to improve student writing is to explicitly and systematically build teachers' knowledge and their confidence in teaching the component writing skills and the types of writing that are most relevant for their learning area as it connects to the curriculum. AERO worked together with teachers to create a new series of guides to support teachers in teaching those aspects of writing that appear to be challenging for Australian students. And given the data I just showed you, we started with punctuation and sentence structure. So let's pursue this sentence structure for a little bit longer as a specific skill. This is an example of an incorrect sentence structure, rephrased as simple sentences, then as compound sentence, then as complex sentence. And I'll just stop so you can read for a moment. That first one is a really typical run-on sentence. And you could argue that, well, the problem is they don't know how to punctuate, but they don't know how to punctuate because they don't understand what constitutes a correct sentence in the first place. So the two things need to be taught in parallel. Explicitly teaching sentence structure with examples like this, modelling how sentences can be combined and giving students opportunity to practice sentence combining will help the students to understand the choices they have and automate correctly forming a variety of sentence types. It helps get them closer to that score of 6 on their NAPLAN writing test. As far back as the 60s, research has demonstrated the effectiveness of a range of sentence combining techniques in improving the syntactic maturity and allowing students to produce a range of compound and complex sentences with ease while composing texts. So the guides that AERO produced are designed to refresh teacher knowledge about simple, compound and complex sentences, providing examples of types of sentences to use in the classroom and run through evidence-based activities like sentence combining exercises that can support students to develop the skills in question. Beyond the skill guides on sentence structure and punctuation, we also produce subject-specific guides on teaching writing in English, science, and health and physical education. These include annotated samples of student writing distinct for each learning area. And I mentioned earlier that we worked with schools like Queenwood on these guides. And again, want to thank Dylan and Rebecca and Kylie and our very own Annie Fisher, who's from AERO and here today as well, for the role that they all played. That school's input, as well as AERO's wider panel of educators, teachers and leaders, and if you don't know about that panel, I will tell you about it at the end of this presentation. All of these people came together to help us refine and improve the usability of the resources that we produced. But in working with the schools, we realised that we needed something more. There needed to be a way to draw the resources we were producing together into a more systematic approach that schools could follow, especially secondary schools where the teachers are separated off into different subject areas and have different writing skills that need to be taught. So we set up a new research project We worked more deeply than we had to date in partnership with several secondary schools to develop and test and refine what we called a school writing instruction framework, or SWIF, which comprises a suite of professional learning resources and practical guides that can inform a school-wide approach to teaching writing. And now I will tell you a little bit about what's in that. It is a proto-framework because it hasn't been published yet, but is going to be very soon. So this is your sneak preview. You know, putting out guides about how to teach reading and punctuation is one thing, but if you're dealing with students who's getting things like basic syntax wrong, you've really got to go right back to word level grammar. You've got to be able to teach about what is the role of a verb. And you need a finite verb in a clause to have a finite, successful, simple sentence that is correct. You've got to go right back into really fundamental elements of English language and how the grammar of English works. So we developed, in the first instance, 4 workshops. Firstly, analysing the students' writing data, and also within the schools we were working with, teacher survey data regarding the time that they spend teaching writing and their confidence in doing so. Secondly, developing teacher knowledge and confidence in the teaching of component skills, sentence structure, grammar, punctuation, using sample teaching resources and including modelling and coaching. Thirdly, we had a workshop on understanding criteria for assessment and on conducting assessment of writing, so that the teachers in these schools do not create writing tasks inviting anyone to imagine they're being eaten unless they're an English teacher and narrative writing is the focus. And finally, on providing feedback to students on their writing. So in each of the schools, we worked with Year 8 teachers throughout 2023, and then we followed them and their students into Year 9 in 2024. We worked with English teachers in the schools plus teachers from 2 other faculties. The schools helped us to test and refine the approach and the workshops. From the experience in our partner schools, we put together a full set of modules that we hope any school will be able to use to repeat the approach that these schools have taken. And this is a glimpse at the full package that will be coming to a website near you very soon. It covers 3 modules, first of all, intended for school leaders, because as with most things in education, this will benefit from a whole school approach. It can be picked up and put in place by an individual teacher wanting to do better, but if you've got a whole school backing this, you can share the pain, share the successes, you can be talking a common language, you can be comparing how it's working for you in your classrooms. So we've really deliberately made a pitch in the first instance to school leaders. 3 modules for them up front, focused on understanding their own school's current context with writing instruction. And then modules 4 to 12 cover the core knowledge of writing skills that teachers need to understand and be able to teach, with worked examples in each of them. So modules 13 to 17 cover planning and assessment and include criteria for assessing student writing. Modules 18 to 20 cover assessment outcomes for feedback and moderation. The SWIF brings together all the resources that we've produced into a single process for schools to run through to strengthen their writing instruction. The modules are designed so that they can be used by teachers from any learning area, and they link to those guides that I showed you earlier. The full set of modules was further tested in the Lismore Catholic Diocese in New South Wales, and we're now making final adjustments to ensure that the package is as user-friendly as possible so that schools can use it independently even if they don't have the support of a coach or a consultant. The lovely Greg Ashman wrote a blog in January about the notion of productivity in education, and it was particularly about the Grattan proposals for centrally created lesson plans. To work, however, wrote Greg, central plans need to be ready to use. As soon as you start introducing additional teacher guides and cross-referencing with separate booklets to look this up or that, or worse, links to online resources, they lose most of their value. Everything needs to be in one place and good to go. We looked at our materials and thought, There's some links, there's some cross-referencing. There is a little bit of go to that website and download this thing. So we are taking a little bit longer to make all of our thoroughly evidence-based, thoroughly tested content also thoroughly easy to use. So thank you, Greg. Oh, there he is. Oh, I've name-checked you several times. But that was really helpful observation at a really critical point in the development of these materials. So, what we've created is an example of a research to practice approach, where the researchers worked closely with schools to address a problem of practice, experiment with an approach to solving it, and developed and refined resources that can then be tested more widely and ultimately made available to all schools. It'll be ready around the middle of the year. Stay tuned to the website. If you're already getting the newsletter, you'll get told anyway. When you see it, and if you try and use it, we would really love your feedback, and we'd love to hear about any experiences you have with using it in your schools. I don't need to tell you the modules follow an explicit teaching approach informed by cognitive science. They are an example of how teachers can apply cognitive science to a specific teaching task, namely writing. Now, if you are interested in the principles of evidence-based teaching informed by cognitive science, I'd also encourage you to have a look at our learning and teaching model on the website. You can get it in just a one-page form that gives you the highlights. There is a whole lot more underneath by way of detail as well. What we've done with this model is describe in the left-hand column what is happening for students when they learn. What is it that we have learned from cognitive science that is going on in the brain that enables students to learn and embed knowledge in their long-term memories, because it is that process that ought to be informing how we teach. If we're not teaching to match the way the brain is designed to learn, we're going to be wasting a lot of time. And we risk them not learning. The right-hand column describes the teaching practices that have been shown to favour that learning process. The model's complemented with an extensive set of resources, setting out the evidence for the approach, explaining and demonstrating each teaching practice in turn. Later this month, we will be adding the first suite of videos showing teachers implementing those practices in diverse classroom settings, just because that reassures people that, oh yeah, it might work in my context as well. I've already told you, this stuff is context proof, but if you need proof, you can have a look and see it working in a remote Tiwi Island classroom, or a classroom in a very disadvantaged area, or a classroom from a school that looks a lot like this one. It's going to work with all of them. All of the resources have been developed and reviewed by experts to ensure their rigour, user tested to ensure their usability, and they are freely available on the website. So, writing's an age-old practice. Thanks, Greg, for spoiling my opening earlier by telling exactly the same story. Never mind. It's essential for learning in schools and for participation in society. It's been around for a long time, but as Greg explained, not so long that our brains have adapted to just learn it naturally. It is not biologically primary, as David Geary would have it. It is biologically secondary, requiring explicit instruction from an expert. That's you. In Australia, writing's received less attention lately than other skills, and that lack of attention is showing in our results. In writing as a whole, and in various component skills that go into successful writing, students' abilities are declining, with a particular problem evident in lower secondary. Have a look at the framework and the resources. Have a go at using them to set about systematically strengthening your writing instruction for your students. If you do so, we can all contribute to the great writers who will be our poets and our philosophers and our scientists, or even our loan sharks of the future. Thank you very much. Now, there's a hand up. I was just going to say, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to stay here for questions, but I would love to. Please.
I guess a few alternative approaches to writing, a lot of low stakes writing tasks embedded throughout subjects in the curriculum. So that science hamburger task, we've got other tasks that would make that task blush, right? Across the curriculum. How do we reconcile this approach with some of the stuff that has come through into Victorian schools over the last 5 to 10 years? Do we get rid of it?
Look, the bottom line is yes, you need to get rid of it. The good news is that since AERO has been around and banging the drum about explicit instruction, the jurisdictions have started to come on board. So Victoria most recently and most loudly and proudly has said that we're going to take a phonics-based approach to teaching reading, we're going to take explicit teaching approach to teaching in our classrooms, and to the credit of the department, they have invited AERO in to open the cupboards and have a look at what's there and give them advice about the quality of the resources when viewed through an explicit teaching lens. As you can imagine, it's a big task and we're not necessarily being invited to look at absolutely everything, but they have taken a really open approach to, we know we've got to improve on what we've got here. And they started with getting us to have a look at some of their maths resources. They haven't presented anything explicitly about writing to us yet, but it's an ongoing relationship that we have with them. And it is the message that we have. I mean, here I am talking to educators largely, but we talk to the systems as well. The ministers own us, they pay for us, so we make sure the message of what we're saying goes back to the system heads, the heads of the departments and the sectors, and that they understand that it isn't just about what the individual teacher is doing in their classroom, it's about how the system is supporting and enabling the change that we want to see. So really good question. I think there is room for great optimism in Victoria. Are there any other burning questions I could answer? Thank you.
I completely believe that this works in every context, and I cannot wait to see the resource and read about it and see the presentation later on today. And I know you started with the analysis of the writing data for NAPLAN. I'd be really interested in seeing how the schools that you worked with, like what growth they experienced and in what areas. Is that going to become available in the report? Or somewhere on your website, which is amazing.
It will be. One of the things that we will do, we've benched it for a little while because we wanted to get the materials out and available to people, but we will also be documenting some case studies of the schools we worked in by way of describing what implementation looks like, really. I said right back at the beginning, we do research, we translate research. On the back of that, we develop some resources, but implementation is the key part because otherwise nothing changes, nothing is done differently. We will be describing that, but I would encourage you to go and listen to Dylan, who'll be talking about that firsthand from the experience of one of the schools. I think if you look at our website and look for the work that we're starting to publish around implementation, we are talking about that story at the moment as well and trying to scale up the idea of, look, this is how it looks in a number of schools we've been to, but there are generic lessons here. There are things that could be applicable and used in other school settings as well. It's early days for our implementation research work, but there is some material there that might be useful and helpful to you. Thank you for the question. And one more.
Probably not a question, it's probably just a comment on that. So I work as an inclusion outreach coach, and what I'm seeing this year is principals and school improvement teams starting to use the AERO documentation because it was rolled out through the principals conference. So it is
fantastic. Oh, that's a great note to end on. All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate the audience, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Go see Dylan later.